And so on the way home, I started to try to formulate a plan of how we would do that. And eventually we did, and I'll show you a couple of slides about that in a moment. At the same time as we were going home, the Monforts said, now the second thing that we want you to do is we want you to start bringing graduate students over to our plant in Greeley. And we're going to give you the second floor just above the kill floor. And we're going to set up machines that'll squirt all kinds of solutions on pieces of meat. And we want you to work on some kind of sprays and that sort of thing that might actually help us kill some of the bacteria that were there. We didn't have the capability at the university to work with the organism, but I knew some people in San Antonio, Texas, named Bellinger, who were about to start up a lab. And were it not for our ability during those first 5 years to have worked with Food Safety Net, Gina Bellinger, John Bellinger, and their small staff at that time, we really wouldn't have been able to do those things. All of you are familiar with where we were and where we're going relative to the incidence of E. coli 15787 in ground beef and in the trimmings that are used to generate ground beef. This just simply shows you what has happened. And if you don't believe there's progress in this slide, remember that we increased the sensitivity of the test over the years, and we increased the amount of sample that we use. Had we not actually been reducing the incidence of E. coli 15787 on the products, this thing would just go straight up. But we've managed to keep it awfully close to where it was in 1995, simply because of three things. And I believe those three things are development of HACCP, secondly, the development of microbiological interventions in the plants, and I'll briefly show you some of those, and then finally the test and hold concept has helped us to identify ways that we can measure our progress and the progress of the industry in general. So the three things that really happened is we developed a HACCP program. The HACCP program that we developed in 1993 for the 5 grinders for McDonald's was taught to everyone in North America who sold beef trimmings to McDonald's. We had those HACCP short courses in Denver, and people from the packing companies would send their people in, and the faculty, a small group of us, 4 professors from Colorado State University, taught HACCP to those folks. The government, of course, developed the pathogen reduction, HACCP as a system, final rule in 1996. But the first one that was actually implemented in most of those plants was one that we developed with the help of the grinders for McDonald's. So I give great credit to everyone who worked with HACCP. The next thing that we did was I had a couple of graduate students, young ladies, one from the University of Illinois, one from Kansas State University, who worked on the very first of what later became the multiple hurdle microbiological intervention system. We called it multiple hurdles, in which you figured out, is there a way that I can set up a system of hurdles that bacteria have to be able to jump over, run around, run under, some way, and get out to the end so that they get out of our net and still affect the end consumer. So we did all sorts of studies. And from those studies, identified 2 things, which I'll talk about later: thermal pasteurization and the use of organic acids. We studied everything that you can imagine that you could squirt on a piece of meat and try to kill the bacteria that were there. But the 2 things that worked best and still work today are thermal pasteurization and organic acids. And then the third thing that we did was develop the concept of what started out as test and ship, and then not break the seal on the truck until you had a negative result microbiologically, to a concept now of the N60, or the collection of samples out of the plate of a grinder every 15 minutes, compositing, and so on. But it was the 3 things: HACCP, microbiological interventions, test and hold, that have really helped us to be able to do the very best that we can do at this particular point in time to try to keep that incidence to an absolute minimum. As I said, Craig Wilson will talk to you later. He is the father of introducing steam pasteurization into plants. A number of the plants used steam, a number of the plants used hot water, 170 degrees Fahrenheit for about 10 seconds. But in both cases, we were killing bacteria by simply getting them warm enough, hot enough, to coagulate the protein and kill them. The second thing that we used was organic acids, and the ones that we did most of the research on were acetic acid, lactic acid. A few people use citric acid. It's a little more expensive, so it's less widely used. But those were the two keys to the multiple hurdle microbiological intervention system. And then you just simply go through a plant and you say, okay, I'm going to stun the animal, bleed it, then I'm going to run it through a process where the first hurdle is a steam vacuuming operation. The next hurdle is a pre-evisceration wash cabinet. The next one might be steam pasteurization, or it might occur clear out at the end. Or we might have organic acid washes up here where it says OA wash. That's a lactic acid or acetic acid. At any rate, you put all these things together in a system, and you get most of the bacteria that you're trying to keep from being on the meat at the time it's actually sold. The beautiful part of these kinds of systems is it turns out that you not only get E. coli 0157H7, you also get Salmonella, and you also get most of the non-0157 S-Tex that we're now worried about beginning in March of this year. So if you use those kinds of systems, it will work. We also extended the use of the multiple hurdle concept. We had a wonderful master's PhD student named Todd Bacon, who's now with McDonald's. Todd Bacon, in the series of studies that he did in the 6 years that he worked with us, extended everything that we had done on the kill floor in the late 1990s and early 2000s onto the fab floor, so that his work on rinsing carcasses going into the fab floor worked, used lactic acid, heated up because the carcass was now cold, so that we got some of the acid down to where the bacteria were. We extended that to the belts and ultimately to actually spraying the cuts on the lines. And it wasn't just Colorado State University doing this kind of research. Kansas State, University of Wisconsin, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, I could name 15, 20 universities doing exactly the same kinds of research, filtering all that in. And at this point, I need to recognize that most of the money to do that, and most of it was done in land-grant universities, was provided by the American Meat Institute Foundation and by the United States Department of Agriculture, some of it by the U.S. Meat Export Federation. So they gave us money, we had the students at land-grant universities, and we were able to do the research. So using all of those things, we developed a concept of using the interventions to protect the product. I gave a talk at the World Meat Congress in Dublin, and I got through telling them what we were doing, and someone in the audience said, I don't understand why you're spraying this acid on these carcasses to get these bacteria. I said, well, one of the ones that we have used most widely is acetic acid, and what we are using is, in fact, half-strength vinegar. It's essentially the same thing as just taking vinegar, mixing an equal amount of water with it, and putting it on the outside of a carcass, just like we put it occasionally on a salad. Well, we still have not been able to successfully convince the Europeans that it's safe to use the organic acids. So what we did at Colorado State in the last 6 years, working primarily with the U.S. Meat Export Federation under the leadership of Dr. Keith Belk, who's a colleague of mine at Colorado State, and Dr. John Sophus, the microbiologist, is did a series of things to try to convince the European Food Safety Authority that it's safe to use the organic acids on beef so that we can recapture that market. So this just simply shows you, as a result of a review of all of the literature that relates to human implications of using those acids, a report was filed, 2007, based upon a white paper that 3 of our graduate students developed, sent over to the EFSA. A whole series of new studies were done so that we could actually measure the residuals of all those things. And it was called AMT, which means antimicrobial treatments. That's what they call our multiple hurdle system. So that we could actually say, here's efficacy, here's how it works. And fortunately for us, earlier this year, they have now determined, it is concluded that treatments, this particular one's lactic acid, will be of no safety concern provided the substance used complies with the European Union specification for food additives. So it appears that we're going to be able to sell beef in the European Union at some time in the future, having used everything that we have discovered, worked with, and developed in this country to try to reduce those. So where do we go from here? Homero asked me to talk about, okay, we've done these things, now what? Where are we headed? As John has mentioned, and hopefully you will ask when we get to the point that we have a panel of experts up here, you'll ask them about the non-0157 S-Tex and where we go from here. We had a long discussion with a packer here in the state yesterday about the implications of what's going to happen as we look for these. A number of people are concerned that although we have 026 and 0145 and 0121 and so on this list, the one that's missing on this list is 104H4. Are you familiar with that one? Germany. How many cases? 4,000. How many people had HUS, hemolytic uremic syndrome? More than 400. How many people died? Almost 100. It is not included in here, and as it turns out, it actually had originated in fenugreek sprouts in Egypt, conveyed onto the product as nearly as they can determine by a human, not an animal. Bill Marler says anytime you find a whole bunch of people dying from some kind of E. coli, look around and look underneath the tail of some bovine animal somewhere and you'll find the source. That's not where this one comes from. It comes from other people. So there are lots of implications of this about what we should or should not do, but it appears that the government is, beginning on March 5th, going to require you to test for these. One of our concerns is that a lady, Dr. Scallon of CDC&P, who has moved to Fort Collins about 8 months ago and is now working with the group that I used to be in at Colorado State University, developed an updated list of annual foodborne illnesses. And the number one cause of episodes is norovirus, which is not surprising. Down the list is non-0157 S-Tex. But the problem for those of us who have considered these things that are public health concerns is the case fatality rate and the number of actual fatalities. And we just simply wonder, and I hope some of the experts in this group will explain to you, why when you look at the number of fatalities for these new adulterants is 0. Surely if we needed to identify additional adulterants, and we do want to help people not suffer from these things, perhaps we should have picked one where occasionally someone dies. She cannot attribute, in her analysis of all the research, any fatalities to those particular organisms. So it is of concern. But we're headed that direction, and we will do whatever we are told to do. Things that have developed since the end of the old multiple hurdles and test and hold. We now have a number of plants who are washing the cattle prior to the time they enter the plant. It's called hide-on carcass washing. So there are a number of plants using that technology to try to get them a little cleaner before they enter the plant. That's new. Most of the focus now And Craig Wilson and I were on a committee for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association to determine what kind of research they need to fund during the next 5 to 10 years. And it was determined at our meeting in Kansas City that they're going to focus now on pre-harvest. Things that you can do prior to the time the animals arrive at the packing plants to try to reduce the load of E. coli 15787. So I'll show you a little bit of the research that's being done in that area, and it has been, in general, relatively disappointing. What can you do? Well, one of the things that you can do is put probiotics in their feed in the feedlot. And it's called direct-fed microbials. And it's based on specific strains of lactobacilli. Well, this is a study that was done by Mindy Brashears at Texas Tech, and she's been the leader in this area. We can reduce the amount of E. coli in the feces of cattle by doing this. We are so efficient in the packing plants at removing it that we've never had a study that shows that it has an effect by the time you get down to the beef trimmings. And so if you go back to the feeders and say, well, you need to feed this stuff in your feed, they say, why? Why? How do I pay for this? So direct-fed microbials do not show much promise. I also am on an advisory committee for a company called Pfizer, which has developed a vaccine which is called Epitopics. And all I do is I hear all of the scientific reports from the scientists that do this work and look at those results with a group of people like me, and we say, okay, does it appear that this works? Vaccinate the cattle so that they have some internal mechanism for killing the E. coli 15787 that's inside their body. Here again, the research, and this is one of our graduate students who did research on the vaccine, did research on the probiotic called Bovamine, did research on an antibiotic called neomycin. The only thing that really works is neomycin. And we'll never be able to use it because of the people who are so concerned about susceptibility being changed in human pathogens by continual exposure in the environment to antimicrobials or bacteriostatic agents. So we're not going to be able to use it. So if we can't use the only one that works, neomycin, is it helpful to use the probiotic or the vaccine? Not really. We've not been able to show efficacy for that. Dr. Grandin and I are also on an advisory group for a company of 14 medium to very large feed yards in the Midwestern part of the United States. It's called Beef Marketing Group. And they have developed a program, and we have our first meeting the 16th, next week. But they have developed a program where they now have a HACCP program in a feed yard. And they're using all sorts of combinations of the concepts of HACCP. Plus they are using things like the Bovamine and the vaccine and combinations of those. They're doing this because they believe that if we ever get a beef supply that exceeds what we need, the major packers will begin to use select suppliers. They will not just go out and buy anybody's cattle. They will buy cattle that were produced in a system that assures safety and quality. So this is the first generation of a new thought process that they're trying to develop. They also are enormously concerned about food safety, but also about animal welfare. And of course, that's the reason for having Dr. Grandin head up the part of this company that will make sure that whatever it is that we do to try to improve quality or safety fits with the precepts, concepts, and beliefs of people who want us to treat animals in certain ways. So that's a brand new approach. Select suppliers. Packers will buy from people who have done things in the production sector to help them with the quality, safety, and animal welfare of the animals concerned. I also should tell you that 2 of the 3 largest beef packers in the United States have conducted studies on their own of the vaccines using hundreds of thousands of cattle. Some vaccinated 3 times while they're in the feed yard, some 2, some 1, and the results are not very encouraging. Those same 2 companies are now using a concept of having cameras on the slaughter floor that they can use to monitor what we call sanitary dressing procedures. Are the people who are removing the hides doing everything they can possibly do not to transfer feces from the hide onto the meat? Sanitary dressing procedures. And it was a concept originally developed with Dr. Grandin's help to monitor animal welfare by both Cargill and JBS. They're now using it to do sanitary dressing procedures on their kill floors. And I'll show you results of some of those. In addition, it actually goes back to things that Craig Wilson was preaching. Those of us who worked with other kinds of hurdles were preaching from the beginning. It's all about how much you care as a worker on that harvest floor about keeping the meat clean. Some of the most effective programs that were used in the United States were used in places like the plant in Tolleson, Arizona, where Dr. Kirby Childs had workers who worked in that area bring pictures of their children. They put them up on the walls as they walked to work and in the areas where they would constantly see them every day saying, just think, everything you do may affect your family, your kids, your parents, old people, young people are the ones usually affected. So trying to change the culture of thinking about what they do is a really important part of what the major beef companies are doing now to try to help us reduce the incidence of those bacteria on the product. This is the video monitoring I was talking about as it's used in Cargill's plants. And their original 2 plants in which they studied sanitary dressing procedures by video auditing were in Fresno, California, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. These are results for the JBS, the old Monfort plants, the old Packerland plants. Just to show you, they use AeroSite. And these are the results of just one. Here's the amount of errors. Here's the amount of cross-contamination at the beginning. But now I'm standing out here working on the line, and I'm a hind-legger. And you know, I might, before there were cameras watching me, have done some things that weren't really kosher. Now, they're worried about that. Who's watching me? And this is real time. I'm on the advisory team for JBS, and we just had our last quarterly meeting. And during the quarterly meeting, somebody said, okay, pull up the kill floor in Solderton, Pennsylvania. Bang, there it is. And we're watching them, real time, watching those folks. Now, there are a group of people at AeroSite. Is this right, Dr. Grandin? A group of people at AeroSite. Where is that? Huntington, Alabama. They have a bunch of people that are looking constantly, 24 hours a day if you kill that much, or 8 or 16 hours if you have 2 shifts. They're recording stuff. There are also people in Greeley, Colorado, the headquarters, doing exactly that same thing. And if somebody doesn't do it right, they get to go to work for someone else next week. So look at the progress that we're able to make. So those are the kinds of things that are being done. Another topic entirely is salmonella. We went through a rush of things, primarily because the school lunch program required that you test for salmonella in the trimmings that were used and in the product that was generated. Found way too many positives for salmonella. We first thought it was in the lymph nodes, and because it was in the lymph nodes, we were getting it in the final product. That may be at least a part of the cause, but there are many, many other things. And in other situations, we're finding it where there's absolutely nothing in the lymph nodes, and the product is still showing up. But we are becoming progressively more concerned because it is showing up with greater frequency in the trimmings that are being used to make ground beef. And I hope some of you will have things that you can bring to the group. Ma'am? Do we know why? No, we think it's a combination of things. One of the plants that I know FSNS has worked with very extensively has had salmonella problems over the years because they are close to the coast and they have seagulls that defecate in the area between where people park and where they walk into the plant. And so they have instituted all sorts of policies to try to minimize the tracking of salmonella into the plant. Others have it coming down from pigeons, down through the roof of plants. So we know that it occurs primarily in bird feces of all species. And so most people are working in those areas. Some people are working in the area of trying, as they sort their beef trimmings, to put the big lymph nodes over here in the rendered product and keeping them out of the ground product. So we're working on all kinds of combinations of things. The guru of this work is Dr. Guy Lonergan, who's one of our former students at CSU, now on the faculty at Texas Tech. And he probably knows more about this than all the rest of us put together. Yes, ma'am? Okay, you microbiologists. Has Listeria? Listeria has the highest case fatality rate. Can you back up to that slide? Listeria, of all the people who get sick, yeah, it has the highest what is called case fatality rate. 1 out of every 6 people that get it die. Anybody know? Yes, ma'am. Is it Melinda? Good example of case fatality rate, 133 cases due to Rocky Ford cantaloupe, 29 died. So that's high, very, very high. The average, not average, the median age of people who died in those 29 was 84.5. So it's very old people. There was 1 miscarriage, is that correct? 1 miscarriage and the rest of it. Okay, salmonella is going to be a problem. We spent an hour and a half yesterday talking about it with Packer up in the Central Valley. We just got to figure out what can we do. The other thing I wanted to end with was the one thing that we have ostensibly added to what we have been doing is the movement toward Global Food Safety Initiative, which was really created by mad cow disease when it occurred in the European Union. And the people in Australia and then Great Britain developing programs that combine quality and safety for both reasons of public health and of profitability of specific companies. So I wanted to talk briefly about that. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is I have spent this year preparing myself. I have taught the HACCP short courses for this company since the 1990s. And I'm now going to teach the BRC courses. And so I wanted to be absolutely prepared to do that. So I've shadowed audits. I've taken the actual course 4 times in trying to learn that. And I just want to tell you some Gary Smith beliefs about what this system looks like. And I've had the opportunity now to teach it once, and I'll tell you exactly what I said. If you want someone to come and audit your company that comes in with a checklist and does this, 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 don't come to FSNS. Because we are going to try our very best, train you in this 3-day course that we're about to teach. That's what I tell the students. You got to be concerned about not doing what happened in the cantaloupe case. Seeing it, but not really asking for some sort of root cause analysis and corrective action. So let's talk specifically about this. Frank Giannis, who's a friend of mine, not a close friend, but a business associate from the old Walt Disney days before he joined Walmart, but he is the one who really pushed it for Walmart. Of the classes that we teach now, a large number of the people that are in there are trying to sell something to Walmart, and so they need accreditation, either SQF or IFS or BRC. A little bit about those. The first supermarket chain to really do this was a regional one called H.E. Butt Grocery Company in San Antonio. I have a friend, Carmen Canoli, who's in charge of that program. She and I were on a couple of programs where I was giving talks on traceability, how we could trace livestock and meat through the system, and she was talking about the SQF program. So I just developed this slide and have used it when I teach. But they really developed it because they do a lot of own brands. And they were having problems with just multiple audits of this and that and the other thing. And everybody had some auditors that they sent in. And so they decided, we got to go to some kind of a system where we can consolidate as much as we can. And so they went to SQF. So that was 2006. Then in 2008, Walmart said, we want you to do a GFSI, and they wanted you to either do BRC, IFS, or SQF. So all of you are familiar with the reason we're moving in that direction with the speed that we are at present. There has been concern in the area where BRC was originally developed that it was not all that it was cracked up to be. And I use this slide when I teach the course. Charlie Cook was a friend of mine. For those of you familiar with the company Cook and Thurber, Charlie Cook and I were members of the American Meat Science Association our whole careers. He was at Oscar Mayer. I remember him telling me when he retired from Oscar Mayer that he was going to go into the auditing business and set up a company to do this. And at the time he told me about his checkmark system. It sounded all right to me. But in reality, a lot of what has been discovered since says this. Of the 14,000 food companies that have been certified by BRC, many of them are either going back to their own systems or changing systems or becoming pretty picky about who comes and audits the units from which they buy. Why? Because it really is only an entry-level standard. The supermarkets have additional requirements for safety and quality, and I hope Craig Wilson will talk to you about those things. BRC audits just aren't robust enough. Well, as a teacher of these, I'm trying to teach it now so that it's robust enough. And I'm really appealing to people's concerns about their wife, their kids, their children, their parents, their grandparents. So you lose some business because you're too tough. Well, just let them find whoever will do whatever they need to do in order to pass real quickly so they can make the sale. We can't do it that way, or the whole system will fail. Too many suppliers were passing the audit with flying colors. These are findings from the Rocky Ford thing, and you probably know as much or more than I do. I tried to keep up with this from reports from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, that's CDPHE. When they finally came out with their findings, they said, well, one of the things that was wrong was they didn't cool the melons. They were warm as they were going through the process. And I visited extensively with Craig Smith, who's a friend of mine from Interfresh here in town, a produce company. We knew a lot of things that we weren't doing. We weren't worried about some things that we should have not committed errors of omission. And that's what really happened to the Jensen Farm folks. They made a couple of presumptions that just weren't correct. And in the haste of things, they did some things that should have been caught. And as a matter of fact, they were caught. Except there was no action on what they found. And so immediately, the Denver Post, where most of this appeared during the time from August until the end of November when it all played out, really took to task this idea that there are these auditors that come in and sort of put a little holy water on it and bless it and say it's all right. A few days before the first case, they had given this company a 96 out of 100 rating of superior. Failed to red flag the problems. So in this series of articles, which will probably win a Pulitzer for the Denver Post, They said, well, let's look. What is the record for companies that have passed with some sort of really high rating on these audits? And they just ticked them off. Peanut Corporation of America, DeCoster Egg Farms in Iowa, and just go down through this. They got really good ratings on the audit and yet created these kinds of problems. So we got to do some real thinking as we go through the process of determining what we are going to do with these audits, or they're just not worth the paper they're written on. There are good auditors, tough auditors, and there are auditors that need to find another occupation, in my opinion. And I know in this company, we are committed to doing the very best that we can do to try to help people understand. If you get caught in one of these situations, it's probably the best thing that ever happened to you. What's going to happen? Bill Marler sized it up, basically said, well, there's about $100 million worth of lawsuits here, and we've searched around, and Craig Smith and I talked about this. What did we come up with? The grand total of all the people that they could sue was about how much? Yeah. He says one has 2 million, one has 10. So where do you get the other 88 million? Well, Bill Marler said, I've never sued a third-party audit firm, but I'm thinking about it. And then a later story said, oh boy, got to do something. Said in our paper that people who die generally cost, liability or litigation. If the people die, it's about $2 million. If they live, it's about $8 million. And so if you got 113 of these, that can be great big in a hurry. The one thing that I did not have time to make a slide of appeared November 30th, and that was what John Bellinger mentioned to you. The first lawsuit has been filed in the state of Colorado for a 95-year-old lady in Hobbs, New Mexico, and they are suing 2 auditing firms, both Primus, and I have nothing against Primus, but they sued Primus, and then Primus had hired that auditor from another company. Is it Frontera? Would Frontera have had auditors? Okay, so it's Primus and the firm that the actual auditor worked for. And this doesn't scare me from a standpoint of being in a company that actually audits. We're more worried about the future from a public health standpoint. So at any rate, if you go the GFSI route, and most of you will if you try to sell to a major retailer or food service company, then make absolutely certain that you choose wisely in terms of the auditors that you accept results from. I'm getting close to the end. Safe quality foods. Let me tell you about trying to teach this. There are 233 clauses in BRC. Basically, the way you teach people to do this is you say, okay, clause 1, clause 2. It is the most redundant thing I have ever tried to teach. It's like teaching an alphabet with 233 letters in it. But let me tell you what bothers me about it. It puts way too much emphasis on stuff that in truth matters to the company that has to continue to exist, but are of very little concern about saving somebody's life. We need to be focused on food safety personally and with regard to public health. And that's the way I'm going to teach it until Homero and John and Gina fire me. Net weights, you're not going to stay in business very long if you're a company and don't know how to control your net weights. You don't have the right words on your products. I know that's important, but that's important to quality. And we're going to come in your plant and spend 2 days and worry about lots of crap like that, in my opinion. I'm sorry. Hope I'm not hurting you more than I'm helping you. But we got to focus on what's important. And that's what we're going to try to do. I've just gone through issue 6 because I had developed everything for issue 5, and they changed the issue and gone back through it. And they said, well, we got to put a new focus on this. And they have helped it a little bit because they used to say, spend 60% of your 2 days in an office looking at documentation. Isn't that fun? And 40% on your factory tours. Now they've flipped that around. It says in issue 6, 50-50, but they say to us who teach it, we really want it 60-40. I'm going to tell you that in that 60, out in the factory, the auditors for the good companies that are going to do this, and there will be a bunch of them, are going to be looking for food safety. Food safety. I'm way less concerned about somebody not wearing a beard net when he's on the back dock moving stuff. Why worry about that? Have you ever heard of a person who died from an infected mustache? Yes, ma'am. I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's because we let ourselves get into a checklist mentality. How much do you tell the ownership of a company when you have a check mark? Yeah. There is truth to that. This is issue 6. You'll see the sort of balance that they have between core principles of going through food safety, meeting the demands of what you actually need by using fewer audits instead of having so many people going through your plant, and then improving efficiency in manufacture of products. That's something every company needs to do in order to continue to exist. Is it that important in a food safety audit? I wonder. So, in addition to providing some sort of evidence for due diligence, which we've just seen how worthless that's going to be. It's going to be worthless for them to say, well, we brought in auditors. Is that going to help you in litigation? Not the way that was done. I'm not being critical of anyone. I'm just saying all of us collectively who care about food safety, you've got to relook at this and think about it. So basically what I'm trying to teach is that if you're in the business of producing food, the one thing that can cost you that company tomorrow is some sort of problem with food safety. Someone did what up in the mountains? Okay. 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 My last slide says quality is important. What I think we need to emphasize is quality is really in these kinds of audits, safety. And again, I think it's a culture issue. You've got to think about all the people that are affected by what you fail to do and through error of omission, which is what happened to Jensen Farms. Gosh, they said, we didn't know there'd be listeria on there. They should have known there could have been salmonella on there. If they'd have just done what they could have for salmonella, they would have gotten a lot of the listeria problems. I didn't mention, and I don't know how many of you are in things like produce, but Craig and I have visited quite a bit because I've taught a number of HACCP short courses now and BRC courses now, where we have people in the room who are in the produce business. And those folks are trying to do anything and everything they can do with a system that they call GAPS and GIPS. And GAPS is good agricultural practices. GIPS is good hygienic practices or good handling practices. And those folks have just taken off running. Craig, could you tell us real quickly about, or you? Tell us what you folks are doing, because I think you're just moving marvelously.
At the field level, it starts with monitoring all the inputs into the system, the seed, all that stuff, the soil sampling and whatnot. There's things in growing. The problem with a lot of fresh produce, lettuces and whatnot, is there's no kill step in it, and it's grown out in the open air. Birds flying over, animals walking through the field, all kinds of opportunities to introduce contaminants. They're setting standards for how far outside the boundaries of the farm, of the row crops, must fences be, how high must the fences be. Water testing, all of those kinds of things are part of the process.
What about workers? Going to the bathroom, washing their hands.
Hand washing stations, those kinds of things, all those things are mandated now.
That's in what they call GIPS, which is good hygienic or good handling practices.
We started a test and hold program very similar to what we're doing in our beef program, where we've had a test and hold since, I don't know, 15 years ago, Gary, something
Yes.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is when Costco started our test and hold. We asked the produce suppliers to put their bagged, ready-to-eat salads on a test and hold program. And they went, holy shit, you're crazy. Oh, the beef guys told us that 15, 20 years ago. But I got to tell you, the produce complex has moved into this position now where with their test and hold program for ready-to-eat produce, it's really improved, one, the quality of the produce, but it's improved the understanding of the processing techniques that they're using to put produce in a bag. You talk to Mike Doyle, and he'll tell you, gosh, you can't buy that stuff. But with our test and hold program now, our vendors know, and the produce complex knows what they're shipping into the industry, and we know what we're receiving and what we're selling. So, and that's the next step for the produce guys. We're going to get it across the board, and it's coming along great.
Excellent. Samir, do you want to comment on pistachios? Okay, you'll touch them. Okay. Anyone else? Question for me or Dr. Grannon? Yes, ma'am. Okay, her question is, are we training auditors? No. No,
Okay.
we're training internal auditors because one part of the BRC is a fundamental clause. And the fundamental clause says you must have people within your company that are trained to do internal auditing on a periodic basis, reporting back root causes, what is it, have you corrected those, so that when the actual auditor shows up, you can say, I've been doing this, I've been checking this, we have a system in this company, we are correcting this. So the way we break up the BRC course is it's 2 days of just going through the system. What I do not like about it is, I believe the great strength of BRC should be, in fact, in the HACCP plan, is they just presume, as the thing is taught, that, oh, well, people have already done HACCP. Yes, if you're USDA regulated, but not FDA regulated foods. And so we got to put more attention on that, and we do. So in this course, we're just telling you, as a company, these are the things you need to prepare to do. That's 2 days of really intensive stuff. But I think it's fun. And then the last day is a course that they can stay for or not, but it's how do you train the people who are going to do the internal audits for your company. And we go through that. And what it really is it's a microcosm, a just small example of what the real auditor is going to do if they're doing their job when they show up. And it prepares you for being able to say, well, what about clause 7-1-4-3? What is your evidence for that? And the really good plants that I visited on shadow audits reach down into a file cabinet and say, okay, here's what we did. Here are my training forms. Here are the results of competency testing for the people who are assigned the hygienic parts of this. You got the evidence. And it's to prepare you to do that so that you get the maximum amount out of your audits. I've been to audits where you say, where are your records for X? Well, let me go back to the office and find them. Any other comments? Are we out of time, Homero? Oh, 104, H4. There are people in here who've forgotten more than I. Melinda, do you want to talk about it? 104, H4. Tell me about interoaggregative and...
We're not testing it for it here at the moment, and the current testing methodology would not detect it. It lacks one of the genes that we currently test for in the US. No, it could potentially be found in other locations, but that's the only outbreak that has been associated with it at this point.
Is there any reason why it wasn't included in the spring?
It's my understanding that the tests we're using now, Gina, is this correct, will not get 104.
That's
If
correct.
they go the way they're going now on the non-0157 stacks, it will not detect 104H4.
Part of the reason for that is that the outbreak occurred after they had started developing the
correct.
methodology. So it happened in the meantime, and there is question about whether they're going to incorporate some type of serotype in the regulation further down the road.
Would you guys that sell produce sell it if it were irradiated sprouts? Won't buy them, okay? That's what's happened on meat. We could solve a lot of the problems that we have if people wish to buy it. But some people feel they can taste it. Other people feel that it would make them light up like a traffic sign. So, thank you very much.